The rotors of the Black Hawk carved through the Afghan night, each beat of the blade sending a low vibration through the cabin floor. The smell of fuel and oil hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp bite of dust sucked in through the open side doors. Inside, red lights cast the cramped space in a dim glow. 12 Navy SEALs sat shoulder to shoulder on the benches, checking weapons and tightening straps, their movements practiced and deliberate. They spoke little. Only short words and hand signals passed between them. In the corner, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her tactical gear one final time. She was known to them only as Falcon, a CIA operative with no backstory. They could verify. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. Master Chief Thompson, the grizzled veteran who had briefed them earlier, had made clear that the target was no ordinary militant. The compound ahead was fortified and defended by more than 30 trained fighters. Even for the most seasoned special operators in the world, this mission would test the limits of skill and endurance. Commander Jake Reynolds sat across from Sarah, his head bent over a briefing folder that he had opened and closed countless times. His face was set, frigid, eyes scanning the same paragraphs of intelligence for the 100th time. Every man in the helicopter understood the stakes. None of them looked in Sarah's direction. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah watched them with quiet attention. Each movement told her something. The way Reynolds traced his finger along the map without looking at it showed his instinct for tactical detail. The way Thompson leaned back, eyes half closed, suggested a man whose calm came from surviving more firefights than most could imagine. Even the younger sniper, Marcus Williams, carried himself with confidence sharpened by experience. They were America's elite. They were bonded by a trust earned in blood. She was the stranger among them. Her folded mission map rested against her chest rig, the corners worn from hours of study. She had memorized every contour, every ridgeline, every possible escape route. But it was not the paper that mattered. It was the pattern she carried in her mind, the constant calculation of angles, probabilities, and weaknesses. She knew how they would move, not from guesswork, but from training that had pushed her far beyond the boundaries of normal human capacity. None of the men around her could imagine what she had become. That secret pressed on her like the weight of armor. Her story had never been simple. Born to American diplomats in Russia, she had grown up moving from one country to another, learning new languages before she finished mastering the old ones. By the time she turned 18, she had lived in 12 nations and spoke 6 languages fluently. A college professor had noticed her ability to memorize and analyze, and that observation had led to a call from Langley. Recruitment had been swift and unconventional. Her handlers saw her as more than intelligent. They saw her as adaptable, an asset who could cross borders both physical and cultural without hesitation. What the SEALs did not know was that this was far from her first time stepping into danger. She had already completed 17 missions across 4 continents, each one buried so deep in secrecy that even her own name was never written in reports. She had infiltrated cells in Syria, slipped through North Korea under assumed identity, and eliminated threats in Eastern Europe without leaving a trace. The dog tag under her tactical shirt bore no unit insignia, only the faint engraving of her alias. It was the only piece of her real identity she kept close. The helicopter jolted as it descended toward the landing zone, dust and grit exploding in clouds that swirled into the cabin. Rotor wash hammered against their helmets, drowning out every sound but its own relentless thunder. Sarah steadied herself, eyes fixed forward. She felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the weight of anticipation. She had spent years training in places that officially did not exist, refining skills that could never be acknowledged. Tonight, those skills would decide whether the men beside her survived. None of them turned to her. None offered trust. And none expected her to change the outcome. Yet Sarah knew differently. In the silence between each beat of the blades, she understood the truth. The most dangerous person in the helicopter was not the loudest, nor the most decorated. It was the one no one noticed. The dust from the landing zone still hung in the air when the SEALs slipped into formation. Rifles up. Every movement practiced into instinct. Their silhouettes merged with the terrain as if they belonged there. Not a word passed between them. A glance. A clipped hand signal. The flex of a wrist. Each cue was understood instantly. It was the kind of unity that only years of combat forged. Sarah Mitchell moved with them, her boots placing soundless steps across the rock. She blended in well enough to avoid breaking rhythm. Yet she knew they marked her as an outsider. The silence that shielded them together was not the same silence she carried. Theirs was trust. Hers was isolation. Marcus Williams, the youngest among them, but already a respected sniper, kept stealing sidelong glances at her. His suspicion was unspoken but sharp. Commander Jake Reynolds, steady and calculating, watched her more carefully than the others. Not hostile but searching. Master Chief Thompson, weathered and hard, carried skepticism like a second weapon. His years in uniform told him that a stranger dropped into his team was rarely a gift. Sarah felt all of it but gave nothing back. Her night vision goggles washed the mountain path in pale green. Through them, she read the landscape like text. Every ridgeline became a fallback route. Each shadowed cluster of trees offered concealment or ambush. Her mind ticked through calculations faster than most could follow. 40 armed fighters were reported in the compound ahead. But the discipline of their movement suggested more than simple numbers. They shifted with the coordination of men drilled to military precision, not the ragged shuffling of militia. That mattered. It meant their plan for a dawn assault was flawed before it began. She remembered the files she had studied before stepping on the helicopter. She could recall every detail without notes. Reynolds, 4 tours in Afghanistan, known for demolitions and tactical improvisation. Thompson, 15 years a SEAL, trusted in close quarters where split-second decisions ruled survival. Williams, youngest, but already a name whispered, for precision at impossible distances. Each man carried scars of places Sarah had only read about in official reports. But she knew them in a way that gave her an edge. She could anticipate how they would move and react before they did. The patrol stopped briefly in a dried riverbed. Knees bent, rifles angled. Sand crunched softly beneath boots. Reynolds crouched nearby, studying her without speaking. His eyes flicked across her gear, her grip on the rifle, the way her breathing never quickened despite the climb. Sarah did not return the look. She kept her focus outward, tracking the faint arc of a guard's flashlight along the compound perimeter, 2 ridges ahead. She let him wonder. Silence was her answer. Master Chief Thompson moved closer, his hand resting briefly on a rock as he leaned into the cover. His glance at her was blunt, almost dismissive. To him, she was a risk inserted by people who had no business dictating to a SEAL team. Sarah felt the judgment, but dismissed it with calm. She had no intention of arguing her place. Words meant nothing here. Only actions would matter. And she had trained her whole life to let performance be her language. The enemy compound glowed faintly in the distance. Patrols moved with too much discipline. Sarah noted the timing of their rotations, the angles of their approach, the blind spots between towers. She logged each observation in the ledger of her mind, as permanent and precise as if written in ink. Her slow breathing matched the rhythm of her mask, steady as a metronome. Under pressure, around hair, the men shifted with controlled tension. Her stillness made them uneasy. Trust in this world was not granted by briefing papers or rank. It was proven in the dark. When the margin for error shrank to inches, Sarah knew she would never speak her way into their brotherhood. She would only cross that distance when the first shots were fired, and silence demanded results. Until then, she remained the quiet figure at the edge of their formation, unsettling yet magnetic, a presence that neither belonged nor could be ignored. The hillside gave them a clear view of the compound below, even under the dim wash of starlight. The defensive positions were obvious. Machine gun nests cut across the main approach. Watchtowers held overlapping arcs. and patrols moved in disciplined rhythm. This was no band of irregular fighters. Their patterns showed training, drilled precision that made the idea of a dawn assault seem almost suicidal. The SEALs watched in silence, their expressions grim as they studied the lines of fire. Sarah Mitchell lay flat beside them, her eyes moving over the terrain with the calm focus of someone who could already see the flaws. She adjusted her night vision goggles and let the lenses sweep across the eastern wall. There, half concealed by stacked supply crates and shrouded in a sagging sheet of camouflage netting, she spotted something the intelligence reports had missed. The subtle shape of stone gave way to an unnatural square edge. The faint shadow of a gap betrayed the outline of a tunnel entrance. Most would have overlooked it as a trick of light. Sarah knew better. The angle, the placement, the deliberate effort to hide it told her it was real. She reached out and pulled a few loose rocks into the dirt before her. With slow, steady hands, she began sketching the compound's outline, using sticks to mark walls and towers. The SEALs glanced at her, skeptical, but curiosity kept them from stopping her. She traced the patrol routes with a fingertip, drawing arcs of movement. Then she tapped the spot she had seen along the eastern wall. A narrow path, leading directly under the main building. Her voice was calm, and even when she spoke, they would split into two groups. One team would create a diversion along the western perimeter, forcing the guards to shift their weight. The second team would slip through the hidden tunnel and infiltrate the main building before defenders could react. She looked at Reynolds and said his demolitions experience made him the best choice to lead the diversion. Thompson's close-quarters combat record meant he would guide the infiltration team. Williams, with his reputation as a sniper, would hold the overwatch position, ready to cover both teams. Every man had a role, every risk shared. For a long moment, no one responded. Williams narrowed his eyes and studied the crude map in the dirt. His skepticism was clear in the tight set of his jaw, but even he could see that her plan addressed problems. The original assault ignored. Slowly, he gave a grudging nod. Reynolds leaned in, tracing the path with one finger, and asked her to show the timing. She laid small stones to mark their positions at each phase, her movements precise, like she had done this countless times before. When the plan was clear, she reached into a pouch at her vest and pulled out a compact electronic device, the size of her palm. It was sleek, almost unremarkable. She pressed a switch and adjusted the earpiece under her mask. Within seconds, a stream of faint chatter filled her headset. She translated in real time, her voice low but certain. The enemy guards were preparing for an attack, but they expected it to come from the south. Their defenses were concentrated in the wrong direction, leaving the eastern tunnel exposed. The SEALs looked at her with a mix of relief and unease. What she offered was not luck. It was precision, the kind that left little room for doubt. Her calm tone as she spoke, the enemy's words unsettled them as much as it reassured them. They did not ask where she had learned to break signals so quickly. They only understood that she had changed the equation. The dirt map lay before them, marked by stones and sticks. A simple board of war. The tunnel itself waited below, concealed by netting meant to deceive. And in the hands of an outsider they had not yet trusted, a small device turned silence into intelligence. Sarah gave no speech, no promesse, no plea for faith. She simply showed them a better path. The team moved under the cover of darkness, their steps muffled by sand and stone, rifles sweeping in arcs that overlapped seamlessly. The compound loomed faintly ahead, lights burning at the towers, shadows sliding along patrol routes. At the eastern wall, just where Sarah Mitchell had marked it, the tunnel entrance waited. Supply crates were stacked carelessly in front, a curtain of netting pulled low. But up close, the outline of stone gave away the hidden entry. The SEALs halted at its edge, their breathing steady but tense. Master Chief Thompson studied the opening with a grim frown. His years of close-quarters fighting told him this passage was nothing short of a death trap. One grenade, one ambush, and the entire team would be finished in seconds. He turned to speak, but Sarah was already moving. She slipped past the crates and crouched by the gap, her hand brushing the edges of the stone. The tunnel sloped steeply down, the air heavy with the smell of oil, rust, and damp stone. She told Thompson to give her 5 minutes. If she did not return or signal, they were to proceed with the conventional assault. His protest barely left his lips before she vanished into the dark, her figure swallowed in seconds. Inside, the air pressed close, heavy and suffocating. The tunnel walls were worn smooth by decades of use, streaked with moisture that dripped in uneven trails. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to move without brushing the walls. Sarah slid forward with a silence that felt unnatural, her movements fluid, her breathing slow, every sound registered with startling clarity. She could hear footsteps above, the muffled scrape of boots across concrete, the steady rhythm of guard rotations. Voices filtered faintly through the stone, distorted but decipherable. She counted each one, cataloged the cadence, measured distance with uncanny precision. Her fingers skimmed along the damp surface, tracing the seams where new construction had been added. Ventilation shafts lined the upper walls, fitted with military-grade filters. Fresh wiring ran along conduits, evidence of recent upgrades. This was no crude hideout cobbled together by insurgents. This was engineered with precision, a network designed to support, escape, and reinforce defense. She mapped each branch, noting where passages split toward different structures above. Every angle, every corridor, every hidden door was imprinted in her mind. Time stretched. Above ground, the SEALs crouched in the dry riverbed, eyes locked on their synchronized watches. 5 minutes became 7, then 10. Thompson shifted with impatience, his grip on his rifle tightening. Reynolds exchanged a look with him but gave no order. Williams lay prone, scope trained on the compound. Tension etched into his face. The night seemed to thicken with every passing second. At 15 minutes, Thompson opened his mouth to call for an abort. Before the word left his lips, Sarah's voice cut through the static of their radios, clear and calm. She delivered her report with impossible precision. She had scouted the entire tunnel system, mapped the interior of all 3 buildings, and counted every guard. She gave locations, numbers, and timing with the certainty of a man-made satellite, not a lone operative. Her words came measured, unhurried, as if the task had been effortless. Then came the photographs. Micro-devices she had carried had captured images of the rooms above her. The pictures confirmed her claim their supposed captive was not chained or guarded. He was seated at a long table, speaking freely with men whose faces appeared on international most wanted lists. The SEALs stared at the images as they passed from hand to hand, the glow of screens washing over hard faces. It was not a rescue mission. It was a summit. Their target, once described as a victim to be extracted, was instead a collaborator meeting openly with terrorist leaders. Reynolds exhaled slowly, his mind already calculating the shift in objectives. Thompson said nothing, but the deep lines on his face grew tighter as he processed the revelation. Williams swore under his breath, his skepticism shaken. What had seemed like a simple raid had turned into something far more dangerous, a moment that would demand choices none of them had prepared to make. The SEALs huddled close in the shallow cover of the hillside, their eyes fixed on the photographs Sarah Mitchell had spread across the dirt. Each grainy image glowed faintly in the dim light of their filtered devices, but the shapes were unmistakable. Their supposed hostage sat at a long table, leaning forward with confidence, his hands moving as he spoke with men whose faces were etched into international wanted lists. The room was crowded with leaders from multiple organizations that were never meant to cooperate. Yet here they were, gathered under the same roof. The silence among the SEALs was heavy, filled with disbelief and anger. Reynolds was the first to speak, his voice low and taut. He said the orders were clear. They were to extract the man alive and deliver him to headquarters. Nothing in the briefing had prepared them for this. Thompson, crouched with his rifle balanced across his knees, let out a bitter exhale. He had seen bad intel before, but never betrayal of this magnitude. He turned his hard gaze on Sarah, demanding to know how she could possibly have mapped an entire network in the time she had been gone. His voice carried suspicion. As if daring her to explain, Sarah did not react. Her calm was unsettling. Williams lay prone with his rifle steady. Eye pressed to his scope as he scanned the compound again. He saw the guards moving in professional formation, disciplined and deliberate. Yet his attention drifted back to Sarah. Through the faint heat signature of his scope, her figure looked wrong. Her temperature ran cooler than the men around her. Her movements smooth in a way that almost defied the stutter of human motion. He blinked, adjusted the focus, and told himself it was nothing more than interference. Still, the thought gnawed at him. Sarah tapped one of the photographs, her finger resting on the face of their target. She translated intercepted chatter without hesitation. Her voice, even as she explained that the guards had been ordered to execute the man if the compound came under attack. What the terrorists did not know was that he was not a prisoner at all. He was their ally. The words settled over the team like a weight. The mission had changed completely. The choice was no longer about a rescue. It was about exposing treason. Reynolds rubbed a hand across his jaw, torn between the clarity of what Sarah presented and the duty drilled into him by decades of service. To deviate from mission orders meant court-martial, disgrace, the end of a career built on loyalty to chain of command. Yet the photographs spoke for themselves. The betrayal was real. Sarah reached into the dirt and began sketching again. Stones became towers. Sticks became walls. And arcs in the sand traced guard rotations. She spoke softly, mapping out an infiltration that would divide the team. Surveillance devices would be planted in vents and corridors. The diversionary force would time their strike with demolitions to pull guards away. While the infiltration slipped through the tunnel, her plan was detailed to the second, each man's role marked with precision. She integrated every strength of the team, as though she had been planning beside them for years. Thompson shook his head, his voice sharp with disbelief. He said no single operative could gather this much intelligence and craft a flawless plan in minutes. It was not natural. Reynolds hesitated, watching Sarah's steady hands move across the dirt. Williams shifted his scope back onto her, studying the way she held herself. She did not fidget, did not glance away. She was still, as if her heart had slowed to match her composure. That unnatural steadiness unnerved him more than any firefight ever had. The argument rippled through the group. Some wanted to stick to the original plan. Others saw the chance to cripple a gathering of leaders too valuable to ignore. Through it all, Sarah never raised her voice. Her calm presence pulled them back to the dirt map, back to the undeniable truth of the images before them. Her silence spoke louder than their suspicion. She was not asking for faith. She was showing them a way forward. When Reynolds finally nodded, the decision carried weight. None of them could ignore. They would adapt. They would follow her plan. Yet beneath their acceptance lay unease. Her intelligence was too perfect. Her instincts too sharp. Her calm too complete. The truth of her capabilities remained hidden. But the sense that she was more than human had already begun to take root. The decision had barely settled among the men when the compound went dark. Radios that had been alive with static snapped into silence. Every channel went dead at once. Reynolds raised his hand instinctively, signaling for calm. But the first crack of a sniper rifle split the air before he could speak. The round kicked dirt inches from his boots. A heartbeat later, machine gun fire tore across the slope. Bright streaks cutting through the night. The ambush erupted with precision that proved they had been expected from the very start. Thompson's team, moving toward the tunnel, was caught in the open ground between boulders. They dove for cover as the dirt around them exploded in sprays of stone. Reynolds and his diversion team were pinned at the riverbed, unable to move forward or retreat under the volume of fire. Dust clouds rose thick and choking. Shadows darted across tower platforms. The air became a storm of muzzle flashes, concussive thuds, and shouted warnings drowned by gunfire. Sarah felt the shift in her body before she made the choice. For weeks, she had remained hidden behind silence, her true nature buried beneath protocol. But the sound of wounded men calling for aid cut through hesitation. Her posture changed, shoulders squared, breath slowed, her eyes sharpened. Her dog tag slipped free from her shirt, clinking faintly as she moved. She engaged combat protocols, designed for moments when nothing else would suffice. Her body reacted with speed no normal human could summon. She darted from cover to cover, her figure blurring through the storm of bullets. Reflexes, guided by enhanced processing, allowed her to calculate trajectories in fractions of a second. She slid across dirt, sprang up against a wall, and disabled the first machine gun nest with a strike so fast the gunner collapsed without knowing what had happened. Her hands moved with surgical precision, disarming rather than killing. Each motion exact, efficient, and final. Williams, watching through his scope, struggled to comprehend what he saw. The figure that was Sarah moved like a ghost, her signature flickering across sectors faster than his optics could track. One moment she was crouched by a wall, the next she appeared on a rooftop, an impossible leap closing the distance in seconds. He whispered disbelief into the comms, though no signal carried his voice. His hands trembled as he followed her across his sights, unable to reconcile what he witnessed. Thompson, pinned behind a shattered barrier, lifted his head in time to see two enemy fighters collapse as if struck by invisible force. Their rifles clattered to the ground, magazines ejecting with precision as if plucked away by unseen hands. He blinked, unable to process it, then realized Sarah was already moving through the smoke, her figure weaving soundlessly among the enemy. Reynolds received tactical updates over the net positions of snipers, exact timing of patrol shifts, routes of approach, all fed into his ear with impossible accuracy. He gave orders that allowed his men to counter every sniper nest with perfect timing. The ambush that should have slaughtered them turned instead into a shifting battle they could control. Sarah neutralized threats one after another. Grenades jammed in their pins, rifles stripped of bolts mid-motion. Fighters dropped into unconsciousness by precise strikes that left no permanent damage. She moved faster than the eye could follow, every action measured and flawless. Dust swirled in her wake. The battlefield reshaped around her. The compound, built to be a killing ground, was being dismantled by a single operative who no longer had the luxury of hiding. Silence had been her shield. Now it was broken. The men around her, trained to fight wars, could only watch as the war itself changed before their eyes. By the time the firing slackened, more than 40 trained fighters lay neutralized. None were dead. Every SEAL was alive. Thompson leaned against his cover, chest heaving, unable to speak. Williams lowered his scope slowly, his breath ragged with awe and fear. Reynolds called for a regroup, but his voice faltered with the realization of what had just occurred. Sarah stood in the dust, her dog tag swinging against her chest. Her body, the undeniable symbol of a future no one had been ready to see. The secrecy was broken, and the truth had revealed itself in the only language that mattered: survival. Sarah pushed through the smoke-filled corridor and shouldered the door to the conference room. The guards at the threshold never raised their rifles. She struck one in the throat with a motion so swift it seemed like a blur, sending him into unconsciousness before he understood what had happened. The second crumpled as her boot caught his knee and her elbow smashed into his temple. The door swung wide, and the terrorist leaders inside froze, stunned that the chaos outside had reached their sanctuary so quickly. She moved without pause. In less than 5 seconds, 8 of the most wanted men in the world were incapacitated. Each was bound with flex restraints drawn from her gear before the first could shout for help. Sarah's breathing never quickened. The efficiency with which she acted suggested choreography rather than combat. As though she had rehearsed every possible angle of movement, she set the men in a line against the far wall, their weapons stripped and discarded in a neat pile. From her vest, she produced coin-sized surveillance devices and slipped them into air vents and wiring conduits. Their faint lights blinked once, confirming that they were recording every word, every plan, every betrayal. These tiny tools were designed to survive evacuation and leave intelligence teams with months of data. Her work was seamless. An intelligence officer's foresight fused with the lethality of an assault operator. The SEALs reached the room minutes later, moving in with rifles raised and adrenaline, still surging from the ambush. They froze at the sight before them. 40 fighters had been neutralized throughout the compound. Not one was dead. 8 leaders sat bound and silent in the center of the floor. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and cordite, but not of blood. No firefight could explain what they saw. Williams whispered the only words he could manage, his voice carrying disbelief. He said she had moved faster than physics allowed. Reynolds did not answer. His eyes swept the room. The bound men, the neat precision of Sarah's work. And he realized this was not luck or chance. It was design. Thompson stared at her without speaking, his weathered face etched with something between awe and fear. Outside, the extraction helicopter descended, its blades sending dust and debris spiraling. A spotlight washed over the compound, painting the scene like a battlefield struck by dozens of operators. Yet they all knew it had been the work of one. Sarah stood in the glow, her expression unreadable, her silence louder than any explanation she could have given. She deflected every question with calm indifference, as though the proof of her actions was enough. For the first time, denial was impossible. What they had witnessed would never leave them. Falcon had forced them to confront the truth. The future of warfare had already arrived. The Black Hawk lifted away from the compound, its cabin filled with the heavy silence of men who had seen something they could not name. Dust and smoke trailed behind, carrying the smell of gunpowder and fear. None of the SEALs spoke. Reynolds stared at the floor, his hands still clenched as though gripping a rifle. Thompson sat rigid, his eyes fixed on Sarah Mitchell but offering no words. Williams kept his gaze averted, though every so often he glanced toward her, as if to confirm she was real. The noise of the rotors filled the space where conversation should have been. Sarah sat apart, her dog tag resting lightly against her chest. The men did not ask her anything because they already knew she would not answer. She had revealed enough in action. Her breathing was even, her posture calm. Yet inside, she measured the cost of what had been unleashed. The secrecy of years was broken. They had witnessed what she had become, and there would be no way to unsee it. At base, debriefings stretched into hours. Analysts swarmed the captured documents, photographs, and recordings. Every detail Sarah had gathered matched perfectly. The terrorist leaders, bound and silent in holding cells, confirmed with their presence the scale of betrayal. What had been briefed as a rescue was, in truth, a conspiracy, deep and deliberate. The interrogations would reveal plots that spanned continents. The victory was absolute, yet unease clung to every corner of the room. Thompson confronted Sarah first. His voice carried the weight of 15 years in special operations. He demanded to know how one person could dismantle an entire compound without firing a shot that killed. Reynolds pressed her about her training, his curiosity edged with caution. Williams said nothing. His eyes locked on her with the quiet intensity of a man who had seen the impossible through a scope. Sarah gave them no specifics. She spoke only of an experimental program, enhancements that could never be reversed, abilities paid for with costs no one outside the program could understand. Her words were few, but her silence was louder. Every man in the room understood what it meant. She was both more and less than human now. Her body engineered through biotech, nanotechnology, and cognitive upgrades that had turned her into something they could not define. They respected her, but they did not understand her. That gap would never close. When the debrief ended, Sarah stepped outside into the pale light of dawn. The air was cool. Carrying the faint scent of fuel from the flight line, the tarmac stretched wide before her. Empty, except for her footsteps. The sun crested the horizon, casting gold across the base. Her silhouette was small against the expanse, yet unforgettable. The dog tag at her neck caught the morning light, a faint glint that reminded anyone watching that beneath the machine there was still a soldier, one who had made her choice long ago. Her legacy was not in medals or recognition. It was in the irreversible change left behind. The SEALs would return to their duties, but they would never see combat the same way again. They had fought beside the future of warfare, and the memory of Falcon would follow them into every mission after